What does an engineer have to do with health? Well, my wife became type 1 diabetic in her 30s doing, quote, everything right. So the specific thing everybody listening needs to know is any oil you get organic. Because one day my wife called, Brian, I'm at the eye doctor, and he says, my eyes are too good, I can't be diabetic. But it's not widely publicized. It's under-publicized. And because it's not out there mainstream, people are getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And it takes a year to get the fish oil out of you. So seed oils are wonderful. Again, the caveat is they can't be toxic. They can't be processed. And if you give fish oil to a normal person, it mimics a diabetic's higher blood sugar level. Women taking the most cod liver oil in 1976 got 3 times the melanoma.
Introduce Professor Brian Peskin, who's going to join us today to discuss some very, I think, critical health information regarding essential fatty acids and how it impacts our health and so on and so forth. Professor Peskin, could you maybe just briefly give us your background, if you don't mind?
Sure. I'm a degreed engineer, MIT, and you may go, what does an engineer have to do with health? My wife became type 1 diabetic in her 30s doing, quote, everything right. Ended up going out to California, the Whitaker Institute, big complex carb guy, actually made her blood sugars worse. And I said, Debbie, now I know why they send you the blood chemistry results, because if they gave it to you when you were there, you wouldn't pay the money. So that clinic has since closed because the whole complex carbohydrate thing is garbage. You look at the curves like I am. So what I bring to this is somebody outside the box. So I care about cause effect. The input's your food, the system is you, and the output is your size and your state of health. So I specialize in dietary manipulation of essential fatty acids, EFAs, and their eicosanoids and derivatives. So a derivative is like DHA, EPA. The EFAs, there's only 2. Parent omega-6, parent omega-3. You have to get them from food, and the body cannot make one from the other. A cow can, but we're not a cow. So you got to be very careful when you look at animals and the analogies. And the key part why you care about this is you have 100 trillion cells. Every cell has a lipid bilayer membrane, and out of that fat portion, 1/4 to 1/3 are the parent oils, parent omega-6, parent omega-3. And your average tissue, like the heart and the liver, is 4 to 1 in favor of parent omega-6. Your muscles, you'll be very interested, are 6.5 to 1, because you're an athlete, in favor of parent omega-6. And your fat stores are about 20 to 1. So when you do a little algebra, the overall composition in the body in favor of parent omega-6, seed oils, best way to get parent omega-6 is 12 to 1. And the biggest problem, Doc, is they don't talk processed, adulterated versus unprocessed organic. So these oils have to be organic. They can't have chemicals in them. They can't be heated to a high temperature because they go bad. And nobody on the internet today is stressing that point. It may be brought up, you don't want processed food. That's too general. So the specific thing everybody listening needs to know is any oil you get organic. So that's what got me into the field. I tried to solve type 1 diabetes. I could not bring a pancreas back, but can no one else in the world. So I don't feel that awful. But these oils have helped mitigate and minimize neuropathy that most diabetics get, and retinopathy in the eyes. Because one day my wife called, Brian, I'm at the eye doctor, and he says, my eyes are too good, I can't be diabetic. This after she was diabetic for about 10 years. And I said, I don't know this ophthalmologist. I started laughing. And I said, Debbie, they don't lie. They tell you the truth. So your eyes are outstanding, and the neuropathy is next to nothing. And she's been diabetic for 30 years. Okay, so that's my background.
Okay, some questions here. Parent omega-6, parent omega-3s. We're familiar with the term omega-3 and omega-6. Most people have heard that. Parent is a different adjective that maybe most people aren't familiar with. So maybe you could clarify that. And then I guess we should talk about if we don't get these if we don't get these in our diet in sufficient quantities, what is likely to occur?
Yeah, if you don't get them, heart disease. Here's one came out 2009. Biggest problem, Doc, in the medical field is they seem to forget the past. Engineering, they don't, because it's always the brilliant engineer today was on the shoulders of the genius from 50 years ago, who was on the shoulders of the genius 75 years before him. American Heart Association, here's their quote, 2009, quote, incorrect to view omega-6 fatty acids as pro-inflammatory. That reflects a rather naive understanding of the biochemistry. So rather derogatory, which I can be sometimes. I think whoever wrote this probably has seen my work. But that was in 2009. Omega-6 should not be looked at as pro-inflammatory when you look at the biochemistry. And in the heart mitochondria, big one came out. This was 2018. Frontiers of Cardiovascular Medicine, Journal of Biological Chemistry. See, the MDs never get these. They live in the clinical journals like JAMA, New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet. But I live in the scientific lipid and biochemistry journals. Parent omega-6 rescues the major remodeling of the cardiolipin induced by long-term intake of DHA. And what this is saying, they looked at heart mitochondria. This gives you the energy to power the heart. Mitochondria are in every one of those 100 trillion cells. There can be 10 to 100. So there's actually more mitochondria than there are cells. Cardiolipin is in the inner layer of the mitochondria. And guess what? It's all parent omega-6. I saw a major internet heart or health site say cardiolipin is supposed to be all omega-3, like from fish oil. That's an outright lie. And everybody that read that is going to put themselves on the path to congestive heart failure. Here's more of what they said. It's not the loss of the omega-6. It was the replacement of the omega-6 by the DHA. So what happens, Doc, is when you overdose on DHA, and I'll give you how much the brain uses because you'll fall out of your chair when you see how little it is. When you get a super pharmacologic overdose, which everybody is getting in DHA capsules from fish oil, it displaces the parent omega-6 and forces it out. It's horrible. So it's a placement of the parent omega-6 with DHA that promoted the reduction in activities. Again, Frontiers of Cardiovascular Medicine, top cardiology, Journal of Biological Chemistry. And the last one, parent omega-3 lowers heart disease risk, not DHA. Particular note, this was in Circulation, one of America's top heart journals, 16 years ago, 2008. Fish intake was similar in the controls and cases, and the variations were huge. And no matter how much DHA they got, it made no difference. It was all in the parent omega-3. So parent omega-6, parent omega-3, Doc, can be looked at the brick and mortar of 100 trillion cells. And if you have a problem, the analogy would be have a house, the brick and mortar and the beams are falling apart, and you're worried about, gee, what color should I paint it? Should it be blue or red or white? Wrong focus. I'm an engineer. That structure's no good. The building collapses and everybody dies. I don't get the out to say, oh, you're different. Your eye color is different. Your cholesterol is different. This is different. That's different. We're much more alike than we are different. But isn't that amazing? Nobody has seen this that I've ever spoken with because it never makes it to the clinical medical journals that you typically read with patients, because this is the hard science and it's tragic. That's why I get so passionate about this, because the truth is there, but it's not widely publicized. It's under-publicized. And because it's not out there mainstream, people are getting sicker and sicker. This is why you have all the bad diseases used to be diseases of old age, right? Heart disease, cancer. Everybody knows somebody now in their 20s, heart attack. Everybody knows somebody in their 30s, 40s, cancer. COPD, rampant. Skin cancer, no end in sight. Diabetes, biggest epidemic on the planet, no end in sight. It goes on, and everything is tied to these oils. And one last thing that's huge, 2017, quote, the majority of cells are hypersensitive to changes of their membrane lipids induced by the diet. So what you are eating directly influences these 100 trillion cells. Inflammation is now known as key, and they called it a game changer. So marine oils instantly become oxidized. That's why you get the bad smell in fish when you go by the supermarket area. It's like rusting in your system. And Dr. Rowan showed me an article. He was the co-author of PEO Solution, a book that we wrote about the oils. And DHA spontaneously rancid at room temperature. Guess what? We're at 98.6. So every time you take DHA, it goes bad instantly. All your antioxidants come rushing from wherever in the body they are. Gee, like in the brain, what do we have today? Rampant dementia, rampant Alzheimer's. Somebody goes, Brian, you moron, what are you doing taking this super pharmacologic overdose of DHA? It all goes bad right away. I need so little. You can ask me how much little goes to the brain daily in a minute. Like I said, you will fall out of your chair. And this is the problem. DHA, EPA, all that, AA, arachidonic acid, they're all called derivatives. So you have the parents over in the corner, and the offspring are derivatives. They're bigger. They're not smaller. They're bigger. And the brick and mortar's the parents. The derivatives are called technically eicosanoids. I'm an engineer, went to MIT because it's easy to spell. Stands for Massachusetts Institute of Technology, but I like the acronym. But I care about not memorizing the term. I care about knowing what's going on. And I connect the dots the way an engineer does. Physicians around the world are following my work, and the results are just staggering when people start implementing the right EFAs. And it takes a year to get the fish oil out of you, 18 weeks to start getting it out of the cell membrane from the poisoning of the overdose, and it takes a year to clear it. So everybody that starts the right oil formulation with the kind of recommendations I give based on the cellular and organ structure of the EFAs, and it's easy to target those with radioisotope testing, so they're very accurate, those numbers. Everybody can get fixed within a year, which is wonderful. And the anti-inflammation is just incredible. But if you're eating these oils, every cell knows they're bad, they're processed, and we're staying in a state of chronic inflammation. And every medical journal article I see today says it's inflammation, inflammation, inflammation. Even Cancer Doc with the oncogene changed it. He wrote in 2010, one renegade cell, he's an MIT guy too, Weinberg, termed the oncogene. He goes, we made a mistake. The number of mutations aren't enough to induce cancer. You need 6 or 7. There's only 3 or 4. He goes, inflammation takes center stage. Inflammation and cancer is now considered a wound that doesn't heal. So the whole focus has changed, but the medical field is often living 20 years ago. That's why physicians like yourself that are functional integrative medicine are cutting edge and getting the current information out, not living 20 years behind the times.
Let me ask you, as you correctly point out, chronic disease is skyrocketed. Heart disease, cancer, diabetes, autoimmune, so on and so forth, dementia. That wasn't the case 100 years ago or something like that. So our diet obviously has changed significantly. I think that's probably safe to say that a big part of the cost. How do we get these parent omega acids, essential acids, in the diet? What were we eating 100 years ago that we're not eating now?
Most foods are highly in favor of parent omega-6. Mm-hmm. Foods that are high in omega-3, lettuce, grass. And what's interesting to note, even the cow eating the grass that's virtually all parent omega-3 ends up with a 2-to-1 ratio in favor of parent omega-6. So even nature has the cow get rid of the excess omega-3 and uses the omega-6. So seed oils are wonderful. Again, the caveat is they can't be toxic, they can't be processed, organic. So sunflower oil, safflower oil, evening primrose oil. Flax is great for the omega-3 source. It's 3.5 times more parent omega-3 than parent omega-6. So it's a backwards ratio. Never, ever, ever just take flax oil. So I consult with companies to make formulations that have an ideal supplement ratio. And to get it as a supplement, meat, for example, has parent omega-6 in it, parent omega-3. CarnivoreDiet is great, but you want to go organic to make sure those pesticides, steroid residues aren't in there. And the reason, especially organic, anything with fat, because nature puts all those toxic residues into the fat stores. And this is why when people start dieting, they can feel so bad for a couple of weeks or a couple of months because all their toxins are getting released from the fat store. So seed oils are the number one way, and this is why I go ballistic on the internet. Seed oils can be toxic, and they are toxic. And this was actually written, Doc, in 1956 in the Lancet, the world's premier medical journal. If people eat processed oils like from margarine that was huge back then, it's less now, and they're getting rid of trans fats, but they've changed them with something called an interesterified fat, which is actually worse than the trans fat. If you give these to a diabetic, their blood sugars increase. And if you give fish oil to a normal person, it mimics a diabetic's higher blood sugar level. And if you give fish oil to a diabetic, it blunts the insulin response, making the response to insulin worse. Is that called insulin resistance? Yes. And if you don't get these oils in the cell membrane, your membrane acts like a piece of plastic. So the hormone comes in. Hormones are all protein-based, and it bounces off. And what happens? Pancreas goes, gee, I need more insulin and more insulin. And after a few years of this, producing overloads of insulin you should never need, your pancreas fails. That's why every type 2 diabetic, if they go long enough, they become type 1. I've talked to diabetic endocrinologists, and they all say that. And the other big thing is pre-1940, there were no type 2 diabetes. So I was one of the first to publicly go, diabetes is an unknowingly created disease. So this is why a low-carb, more carnivore, ketogenic diet is much, much preferable to a high-carb diet.
So you mentioned, and a lot of people are very seed oil phobic, I would say. It's currently the big phase now. Most seed oil that's on the market, I would argue, would you argue is processed? I think that's the case. I don't know because I don't really.
You're absolutely correct. You go into any supermarket, all the oil is processed. So that's canola oil, which is not a good oil. It's the basis of mustard gas. It has erucic acid. Again, it's the terms I never remember, but they made mustard gas in World War II with this. You don't want Canada oil. That's what canola oil stands for. It's not a species. It's horrible. You don't want soy. It's an endocrine disruptor. You've heard the term soy boy. So you get all the women are getting overdosed with estrogen. It's not their body doing it. It's what they're eating. And the poor men, their testosterone counts are down to nothing. People stop the soy and start taking the oils in the way I recommend. Testosterone 800, 900 off the charts. And your testosterone normally should not decrease, by the way, in a healthy male. If it's decreasing, like this is the other big thing, because all the hormones are based on cholesterol, and cholesterol is tied to these oils. They transport the parent essential oils, the parent omega-6, the parent omega-3, through the bloodstream to make it water soluble. People aren't told this. So it's complicated, but it's simple when you have somebody like me that's done the work and can then just connect the dots. But you got to get the organic seed oils back with more omega-6. And I recommend a formulation that has GLA from evening primrose oil so you can bypass the delta-6 desaturase metabolic pathway that is impaired in 9 diseases. And diabetes, it's impaired. Type 1, type 2. Cancer, it's impaired. Any inflammatory disease we've discovered has a delta-6 desaturase impairment, and you can't fix it. But thank God you can compensate for it. So that's why any formulation should include GLA.
You had mentioned fish oil being particularly egregious a problem because of displacement of the omega-6 parents by 3s and so on and so forth. What about the consumption of fish itself? Some people would argue
Excellent question. Yeah. Fish itself is fine. Never forget, fish oil is a processed food. They're getting it out of either fish that have gone spoiled and bad, because think about it. A top restaurant isn't going to get fish that's spoiled. So what do I do with this stuff? And it came out 20 years ago, fish oil. I was around at the health conferences when it first came out, and I'd go to the wholesalers, Tree of Life, the distributors. Are people buying this? No, we can't give it away. But 10 years later, with tens of millions of dollars and a pile of cooked up garbage studies, never forget, everybody listening, studies aren't science. So I use a study to confirm the science. And when I say science, textbooks of medical physiology, Harper's Illustrated Biochemistry, Streyer's Biochemistry, medical textbooks, the study should confirm it, not be opposite to it. But today, the medical field doesn't care about science anymore. Remember, I told you they don't look to the past. They don't even care. It's what does the study show? And what I come up with, I read these studies because I spend the bulk of my time, hours a day, going through studies. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. And then the conclusion is idiotic. And it's just so tragic. And if you look at most of the failures today, fish oil fails in everything. Taking more fish oil doesn't help dementia, doesn't help the brain, doesn't help visual acuity. I'll give you how much DHA goes into the brain per day, because as an engineer, I want to know dosage. What's that based on? How much DHA does the brain need a day? Here's the number, 2 to 6 milligrams. Milligrams. Put that in perspective. Fish oil is sold in 1,000 milligram capsules. Typically 60% of it's DHA EPA. So you have 600, and I just told you on the lower end, you need 2. 600 divided by 2 is a 300 times overdose. 600 divided by 6 is 100 times overdose. Everybody taking one fish oil capsule, and you have health professionals saying you want 4,000 milligrams. Each capsule, 100 to 300 times super pharmacological overdose. To put that in perspective, hey, Brian, take 100 aspirin, call me in the morning. Don't, I'm being facetious. You will bleed to death and die. This is the analogy of what poor people are doing unknowingly on a daily basis. 100 times overdose. But Brian, the eyes have DHA too. Fine, double it. So they're getting 50 to 150 times overdose. The point is, looking everywhere, you have 2,600 times more parent omega-6 in the body than you do the derivatives. And this is the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, Journal of Lipid Research, Polyunsaturated Fatty Acid newsletter. Imaging incorporation of circulating DHA into the brain using positron emission tomography. That's PET. Journal of Lipid Research. So the National Institutes of Health, U.S. Department of Agriculture did studies with radioisotope tagging to see how much DHA was used in the brain. That's their number, 2 to 6 milligrams. I'm not making this up. I've never seen anybody report this figure outside of me or somebody that has seen my work. And it's just tragic. You're getting recommendations, Doc, not based on science.
Let me ask you, when you're assessing this, because I've seen some people will get a 6 to 3, omega-6 to 3 ratio,
Yeah.
analyzing blood tests. Maybe it's on a red cell. You'd mentioned like 12-to-1 was the average ratio, and it varies across tissues. How do you correctly assess in your own body where you're at, or is it even achievable outside of like a biopsy?
The biopsy is ideal for the tissue, but you don't need it. The red blood spot is what you're talking about. You can get that. The problem is the guidelines are made up. It's like the cholesterol guidelines were made up. Remember 20 years ago it was 250, then it went to 220, then it went to
190 now, yeah.
It keeps going down and down and down. And today, believe it or not, if you've had a heart attack, the guidelines are less than 70 milligrams per
for LDL. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's the number. They want you having no cholesterol. Now, let me tell you, the deal with cholesterol, that again is never publicized, and even the Nobel Prize-winner Goldstein for cholesterol said we really should be looking at what cholesterol is tied to. So you have the cholesterol molecule, and it's magnetized to the EFAs, the oils. That's how they're transported. It's technically called a condensation reaction, where you get rid of the water. Again, that's the biochemistry, but I like the simple thing. So just picture cholesterol with a magnet, and the other end of the magnet is to the oils. Now, if you lower it, you lower the bad ones. Remember I told you all the processed oils are bad? You lower the bad ones. That's great. What are you inadvertently doing? You're lowering the good ones too. So the answer is not lower LDL-C. The answer is add these fully functional organic EFAs back in, and then guess what happens? LDL naturally goes down because your body can sense, do I have good stuff in here? And Dr. Rob, colleague of mine, MD Anderson, top surgeon, he was the chair for 15 years of plastic reconstructive surgery, said, Brian, I put your recommendations to work on at least 100 patients. All of them, their cholesterol goes down. And I was wondering, how is this? Because there's no cholesterol sensor in the bloodstream, by the way. There is a sensor for sodium, potassium, glucose, of course. And the glucose one is so tight, it's to 1 part in 1,000. Because if you're not diabetic, every human being is regulated to 1 part in 1,000 the same. And it's less than a teaspoon of sugar is in the bloodstream. That's the 5 millimoles per deciliter. So when I first saw this again, I'm an engineer. What the heck does that mean? I figured it out. This can't be right. Can't be a lousy teaspoon of sugar in 5 quarts of blood. There was. And it was, my God. This was back 25 years. We're having nutritionists tell people to make carbs the basis of the diet, to eat 60 to 100 teaspoons of sugar a day. Where's all the sugar going outside the one if you don't burn it up right away with exercising? Exercising, you do burn the glucose up, as you well know, to fat. So my question was, if I don't eat the carbs, I don't get fat, then I don't have to live in the gym if I'm real busy and don't have the time to. I love working out and exercise, don't get me wrong, but you can minimize it if you don't live on the carbs. And the whole health profession back then was telling everybody to live on carbs. And now it's funny, your same nutritionists that were telling you how great carbs are is now saying how bad they were. Wait a minute, they're right this time. But why on earth are you believing them? They're the ones that turned everybody in America diabetic to begin with. Tragic state of affairs, Doc. You got the blind leading the blind with no science. And where's the 1 teaspoon of sugar out of? Textbook of medical physiology, basic medical biochemistry. These are the medical school books I'm sure you used when you went to medical school. Because Textbook of Medical Physiology is the #1 book of physiology in North America, and they've had 22 editions. So it's the #1 book, 22. It's like, why aren't you going here and using the science instead of just making things up? I'm not big on opinion. People go, Brian, what's your opinion of this? And wrong question. You don't want nor need my opinion. You want me to go, have you come across what's the scientific medical fact that we don't know? So I specialize in giving state-of-the-art medical science that most physicians haven't seen before because they don't live in the physiology and biochemistry and lipid texts. It's not your fault. You can't do everything. But if you don't have a guy like me, because it never makes it into the clinical, JAMA never has anything like how much DHA does the brain use. They may have a study on DHA failing, but they don't get into why it failed. Or cancer is also increased with people. Here's another one. Women taking the most cod liver oil in 1976 got 3 times the melanoma of the non-fish oil women. This was done in Norway. It was a 20-year study. Every case of cancer was based on pathology. It was in the cancer registry. Norway wanted to show fish oil was protective. Just the opposite result they got because they're surrounded by water. So this was underpublicized. I've never, ever seen anybody report it. So if anybody's taking cod liver oil, toilet, that's where it belongs. It will put you on the road to skin cancer. And by the way, your skin, 100% parent omega-6. There's not supposed to be any DHA in there, doc. So if you take the fish oil in the doses they're telling you to take, it displaces the omega-6. The sun shines on your skin. Your skin gets hot because it could get 100, 105 degrees on the skin. Guess what? It's rancid. Remember, DHA is rancid at 72 degrees, room temp. 98.6 in your body, it's super rancid. 100 degrees in the sunlight, it's super, super, super rancid. Skin cancer. And this is why, in spite of all the sunscreens, the dermatologists don't have a clue to tell people what to do. The sun is great. You should be out in the sun. You make vitamin D if you have the right cholesterol structure in your skin. Automatically, I'm not saying burn yourself, but I used to get terrible headaches, 10 minutes outside in the sun, headache. That was the body saying something's wrong. Then when I did my research into the EFAs and got the right formulations, could stay an hour outside in the sun, and this is great. No headache, feel invigorated, get the nice tan, get the vitamin D, boom, everything changes. It's unbelievable. EFA deficiency is at the core. Not vitamins, not anything else you're doing. EFA deficiency, and because it's not looked at, or even worse, we're given the wrong things to take, like overdosing on fish oil, nobody gets it. And we're never going to have any physician protocol maximized unless they get the right EFAs in there, because that's a terrain. So all the physicians around the world I work with maximize their protocols once they start adding my EFAs, and it's, Brian, I can't believe the difference. And it's fast. It's typically within a month or two. None of this, trust me, take it for 6 months. A month, you will see a difference. And the typical difference, doc, is energy. And you're a big exercise person. Mm-hmm. The lactic acid burn level, or the acid burn level, is almost non-existent. I used to train with Samir Bannout. He won the Olympia before Schwarzenegger, and Lee Labrada came in second in the Olympia. So I'm used to very hardcore training. I haven't touched a weight in 20 years because I don't want to tell people I do everything right and I take the oils too when I stay great. It's got to be, I do a lot of stuff wrong. I take the oils and I'm great. I don't care what you measure. I'm great. There was no acid burn. And I do a reverse pyramid. So I start with the highest weight you can. You go to failure. Muscle is fatigued and basically shaking. No burn. And no one can believe that, because typically, as you well know, the second day is when your muscles hurt heck, and you get that burn when you get to failure. That shows you're utilizing more oxygen. So we have runners using this, bodybuilders, athletes. It acts as a shock absorber for the brain. So anybody playing sports, basketball, football, anything that requires physical contact, shock absorber for the brain, you don't get the concussions. It's unbelievable.
Obviously, we can't just eat essential fatty acids. I mean, and as you said, it's the requirements are quite small, at least for the threes. What about the context of the diet? Does a different background diet impact the relationships or the requirements?
That's a very good question. There's always small genetic variations, but luckily, lipid membranes are the #1 modifiable tissue in the body. So the best chance to make a modified improvement is in lipids. So with my formulations, you're talking a mere half a teaspoon to a teaspoon a day is all you need for the right EFA supplement. Not tablespoons, a half a teaspoon to a teaspoon based on body weight, because again, these are brick and mortar of every cell in your body, and you have 100 trillion of them, but they're very small. That's why you only need less than a teaspoon. But that's it as a supplement. So my comment is you can eat pretty much whatever you want. Anything that's fat-based, bacon, butter, eggs, cheese, cream, please get organic, because you don't want the chemical processing and you don't want them ruined. And you're great. And then I tell people, just take it, an EFA supplement. And there's companies I consult with. I don't sell supplements. I am a straight science guy, but I make a living consulting with nutritional companies that want the right supplements based on science, because their job is to give the client, the patient, not patients because they're not doctors, what they need, not what they think they need. And that's the difference. People don't know what they need. It's my job, based on science, to figure out what you need. And if people look at my website, brianpeskin.com, they can see the body of science I have. You don't need to buy anything. At the end, there's my program that has 3 books I've done, videos I've done, reports I've done. But you don't even need that to get most of this information. You can watch videos that I've been taped at. You can see sample reports that I have and get the quality of the science. And then you decide what to do. I'm not here to tell anybody what to do. I don't want Brian followers. At best, it's, hey, this guy talks real fast. Sometimes you may even sound a little arrogant, but I'm not, because it's right. But I want people to go, man, I haven't heard anybody talk like this with the level of science he's given that's not his. And he gives the reference, and in everything I write, I put where it came from right on the page of the book or the report. I don't go to the end in the end notes where nobody's going to go. It's right there, and I give you the actual quote of what was said. And then if it's technical, of course, I'll explain it. But nobody else gives you the actual quotes. I've seen paper after paper in journal articles that they lie about what the journal article said. And they know with 50 references, nobody except somebody like me is going to pull every one and go, liar, liar, liar. The journal article never said this. And it really is that bad. Science is no better than politics with the mistruths. I don't need to get into politics, but science is tragically, outside of the medical textbooks, people don't give you the truth because they're misleading you. Excellent question. So regular food has these oils in it. A steak does have parent omega-6, parent omega-3. Now, the more you cook it, the more it will be denatured and not fully functional, but it's in there. And food has it. And again, it's more 6-3, but I recommend everybody, just to be sure, spend a couple bucks a month. It's very reasonable, less than $1.50 a day. You can get the oils you need, and it's 100%.
Yeah, interesting. And you just go back, because we glanced over this, but assessing, you said the red blood cell ratios that you can get, is there a range that you think is more appropriate?
I used to do it. I looked at mine, and then I looked and saw what they said to do. So all I can tell you is, if you take these oils, they go into the bloodstream. It's known. They know what the half-life is. It's very, very well known. The FDA understands EFA metabolism superbly. It's all known. Just their references are made up and too skewed to you needing all this DHA. I don't tell people to get a blood test anywhere. You can, to see where you're starting, but you want more omega-6. And it's funny, the more parent omega-6 you get, the less arachidonic acid there is. And arachidonic acid, AA, is what the entire health field says is so inflammatory. And they're not quite right there too. There's two sides. There's inflammatory and there's anti-inflammatory. I want inflammation if I'm getting hurt, right? You're an athlete. Or if I'm injured, if I cut myself with a knife in my arm, it's going to bleed. That's inflammation. So your body goes, whoa, we got a problem here. Boom, fix it. And then after it fixes it, you're supposed to hit the anti-inflammation stage. But the problem today is that anti-inflammation stage never comes, and you stay in what's called chronic inflammation. And that's where every cell in your body is inflamed and you never heal. And your body can sense this from the adulterated oils. And it's a thermodynamic reason, because if you're going, how can a cell sense what it needs if it's getting the wrong stuff? I was shocked too. But it can, it's technical. Body is made incredibly. Again, as a systems engineer, I'm amazed, in spite of doing everything wrong, how well our body is. Put in perspective, I have a Ferrari, it runs horribly. I check everything, everything's right. Oh, I didn't check what the guy put in for fuel. He used the cheap unleaded stuff because he didn't want to spend money on premium. That was it. Wrong fuel is the start of all the problems, and nobody except me started there, because wealthy people get cancer, heart disease, poor people get it. Disease goes all throughout the socioeconomic conditions, and the only way that could occur, food. Even the best restaurants have been conned into getting rid of coconut oil, which is a saturated fat. Wonderful. My first job was McDonald's. Lard, omega-9, which is one double bond. It's unsaturated oils, and it's hard for it to go bad. So we keep getting misled.
So with regard to the biggest things to avoid, because obviously—
Hey, give me 1 second. I'll be right back.
Okay. Anyway, I'll ask him what he thinks is appropriate to avoid rather than consume here. Anyway, with Professor Brian Peskin, MIT engineer. He's into bioengineering, I think. So, Professor Peskin, yeah, I was just going to ask you about major foods to avoid. You mentioned there's got to be a number of them. Obviously, with regard to the oils, you said fish oil subcapsules and maybe oxidized seed oils and things like that. What are the big things you would avoid in total?
Big things: avoid any commercial oil. Mm-hmm. So if you're getting it at your supermarket, make sure it's an organic one, or get it at the health store. I love, for frying, for example, avocado oil. It has a smoke point of 440 degrees. It doesn't go bad. Organic coconut oil, a fully saturated fat. It doesn't hurt anything. We've been misled here too. And actually, what is clogging an artery is 86% adulterated omega-6. This is known.
So this would be the quote-unquote seed oils that we get in processed food. Then,
yeah,
correct?
This is what they're saying. So 86%, and they are not going bad in the body. I want to make this very clear. Dr. Spiteler, top German biochemist in Germany, and I spoke to him, wrote extensively on the oils. Parent omega-6, parent omega-3 are very resistant to going bad, oxidizing, rusting in the body. It doesn't happen. You typically need more than 3 double bonds. It's called a bisallylic bond. It's a double bond to a single bond. Again, it's technical, but you don't need to know it. If it has more than 3 double bonds, DHA has 6. That's why it's so reactive. EPA, its precursor, has 5. That's why they're so reactive. They go bad in the body. But the adulterated omega-6, we're eating it. So it's ready-made. And this was dietary polyunsaturated fatty acids and compositions of the human aortic plaque. This was in the Lancet. So cardiologists should know this, but they don't. This was done. Annals of Biochemistry. Atherosclerotic plaque using high-performance lipid chromatography. Oxygenated lipids in human atherosclerotic lesions, eicosanoids. So these are the journals that had this. 86% of your plaque, your clogged artery, is adulterated oils that people are getting in their diet unknowingly. So number one by far, anything with fat in it, eggs, cheese, bacon, butter, milk, cream. I'm not big on milk, cream, organic. Minimize the carbs because carbs are like battery acid. They auto-oxidize. This is why diabetes is called a disease of premature aging. So the carbs are bad. Am I saying no carbs? No, you can't do no carbs, and you don't need to do no carbs. Remember, there's 1 teaspoon of sugar in the bloodstream. Now that gets replenished, but there's 3 times more fatty acids in the bloodstream. So we're supposed to be running on our own body fat. But Brian, the brain runs on glucose. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to run on free fatty acids. That's a ketogenic diet. But we force the poor brain to run on carbs. And guess what? Dementia and Alzheimer's is now looked at as a disease that's cardiovascular. I was at a major seminar at Methodist Hospital in Houston a few years back. Is dementia a cardiovascular disease? And the big answer is yes. And you can prove that because there's at least 40 million capillaries in the brain. What's capillary made out of? 100% parent omega-6. So if I'm not getting these, quote, toxic seed oils, I got 40 million capillaries in the brain that aren't structurally correct. Would I expect there to be a problem? Yeah. And then with the bad oils coming in, clogging the capillary arteries, we're in deep trouble. So minimize the carbs, any oils, organic. Do not use, there's just 2 oils not to use for cooking. Soy oil, because it's food for a pig. Literally, I've lectured in Iowa extensively. And if you've ever smelled soy, it'll make you sick to your stomach. And that's one of nature's way to say, don't eat this. So they deodorize it, they process it. Soy is food for a pig. It's an endocrine disruptor. It's a precursor to estrogen. That's why the guys get effeminated and their testosterone is down by half. That's why the poor women are overdosed on estrogen. It's not their body doing it. Think about how crazy that one is. Yes, your own body is turning on you and wants you dead. Our species would be gone if that were true, and it's just not true. So there's not much you really have to avoid. Olive oil, again, it's omega-9. It's a non-essential. Your body makes it. Make sure that's organic too. There's a lot of mislabeling. They'll say it's all olive oil and it's soy oil and canola oil because they're cheaper. So if it's organic, it's a much higher standard. Spend the money on the oils. Eggs are great. Just minimize the carbs, minimize the processed oils. So it's really the lack of the negatives. And I eat a pile of steak and I'm a carnivore like you are. And it's just fine. There's no problem with the meat. It's what they put in the meat. So I tell people natural meats, natural chicken. You don't want the antibiotics. You don't want any of it. And you're good to go.
Let me and I'm not sure if this is within your purview or not. I'll just ask this in the question. So we talk about insulin resistance. There's some concern around the accumulation of things like ceramides, which are fat derivatives, interfering with the receptor. Can you discuss how maybe the essential fatty acids might play a role in that? Or
well, the biggest thing, I'm not big on anything except the cell membrane. Everything else is what I say in the noise. There's what's the main thing that's 95% of the issue, and there's what could be the other 5. I honestly don't care about the other 5. I want that 95% fixed. And that's the cell membrane. So if that's properly structured, you don't get a plastic membrane because where am I coming up with plastic? If you give a chemical engineer margarine and a piece of plastic, they'll go, these are very, very close to the same structure. So again, the insulin resistance is at the direct cellular level. It can't get in there because you have a membrane that's booting it out. It's that simple. You don't need anything else. So what I tell practitioners, the whole medical profession is start your patients adding these oils and see how far this improves things. If it doesn't bring it enough that you'd want, then you can do anything else. But this is fundamental. Again, brick and mortar, you got to start with the cell membrane because it's critical. The membrane's half protein, half lipid, half oil. There's no carbohydrates in the cell membrane structurally. Okay? So out of the half, never ever forget, a quarter to a third are the parent oils.
With regard to absorption in the gut, is there anything that's modifiable? Obviously, food is a matrix. You obviously you can deliver concentrated forms of these particular members. Does it make a difference?
Excellent question. First thing is the entire lining of the gut. Guess what it's made of? Parent omega-6. So these people telling you seed oils are toxic, don't have them. The whole lining of the gut's omega-6. What do we have? Leaky gut syndrome is rampant, right? Guess what that is? The cell falling apart. It doesn't have the parent omega-6 that's organic and fully functional. So your cells are falling apart. That's the leaky gut. Same thing with your skin. If you don't have the parent omega-6 in the skin, you're going to get all kinds of skin infections. They come in. As far as what it is, these oils are food. Nothing needs to be done. Do you have to modify a steak? No, it just gets used. Same thing with these oils. They're direct food. Essential fatty acids are a food. It's not even a nutritional supplement. It's in that category, but it's an actual food. So there's nothing you need to do as far as modifying, and we don't want to modify. Now with fish oil, they do methyl esters. We like what's called the natural triglyceride form, which is the form you'd get from eating the food. And we don't like processing of anything, and absolutely no chemical processing. Fish oil is, they have natural triglyceride fish oil too, but it's antifreeze for fish. Dr. Rowan told me about the antifreeze part. He said, Brian, guess how much less DHA is in a warm water fish than a cold water fish? I said, no idea. 14 times less. So the fish living at 70 degrees has 14 times less DHA in it than the fish living in 30 degrees. We're at 98.6. So instead of taking less of the DHA fish oil, we're having more. The worst possible thing you can do based on no science whatsoever. So everything is science. So I really pray people look at brianpeskin.com, look at the stuff I have for free and just see what's there so you can see the truth for yourself. Doc, people know more about how their car works than they know about how they work. And that's got to change because the health profession has let us down. They really have. And now what's happening is all the physicians are getting sick. They're getting as sick as their patients. I'm getting more and more physicians coming to me. Why are you coming here? I'm sick myself. This never used to happen. They're so stressed because everybody is so sick. They just have infinite patient loads and they're getting sick. And by the way, you should be able to take stress after stress after stress. In the 1800s, there were no supermarkets. There were no antibiotics. There was no good surgery, if any surgery. You're an orthopedic surgeon. They didn't have any of that back then. They just chopped things off. Talk about stress. I get real perturbed when I hear, oh, I'm so stressed. You're supposed to be able to live under huge stress. You can't because you don't have the oils. And the oils are the basis of all the steroid-based hormones. Estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, everything, adrenal hormone. So it's so fundamental.
Yeah, I can certainly, I don't disagree that the medical system has messed things up quite a bit where we're no longer, we're not a healthcare, we're a sick care system. And, we undervalue nutrition as a therapeutic option for sure.
Yeah, well, people like yourself, having people like me on, we can make a big change in that. If the audience listens, yeah, I hope they do.
One other last thing. I think we'd mentioned the folks in Japan tend to live longer. Maybe they have less heart disease. A lot of people think it's due to the fish consumption.
No, less processing.
Less
they don't have processing. Yeah. It's like eating the fish is fine. A lot of the oil gets cooked away. You bake fish. And they did a test with diabetic patients eating the oily fish, like a sea bass or something, versus codfish that has next to no oil. The lack of oil, the non-oily fish had better blood chemistry. So again, and this was 1986, and it was repeated 4 different times. So the fish oil makes your blood sugars worse. Cook the fish, fry the fish. I have fried cod all the time. I have baked cod. No problem at all. It's the fish oil supplement you don't want.
Okay, fair enough.
Excellent question.
Yeah, and I've seen where they had this sort of belief in fish oil supplements, and then it went away, and then they said, "Oh, we have to have a special formula." The recent thing I can remember,
need more. The biggest thing is
we need more. There's a special supplementation, a special formulation for it.
No,
Is that,
it's the wrong
is that all?
stuff. Antifreeze for fish. We're not living in 30-degree water. We don't need it.
Gotcha. All right, Professor Peskin, this has been quite interesting and hopefully educational for a lot of folks. We are just about out of time. So once again, if you can share your particulars on where people can find more information, that would be great.
Sure. If they want to see my website, it's Brian, B as in boy, just like my name, Peskin.com. There's a medical food we have where the patient has to be under the care of a practitioner that can write scripts. They don't need a script, but it's called Easy Trek. So if they have a disease or a disorder, heart disease, cancer, COPD, diabetes, please look at goodforhealth.org. Goodforhealth.org. It's called Easy Trek. It is turbocharged EFAs made for people with diseases. It maximizes the anti-inflammatory PGE1 that 9 diseases have an impairment in that pathway. It's called the D-6 Desaturase Pathway.
Can I just ask another quick question? COPD, most people associate with chronic cigarette smoking. That's mostly what's associated with it. How do these EFAs affect COPD in specific? Obviously, the lung is another membrane. But
they are vasodilators. They're incredible. If you send me a text, I'll send you a practitioner, an MD herself, COPD for years, was taking 2 steroids within a week, got rid of one of the steroids. Another one of her patients was on oxygen. Within a month, the oxygen was gone. So they're bronchial dilators, and they're just unbelievable what they do, because PGE1 is also a vasodilator in addition to it being an anti-inflammatory. So all the nutrients, including more oxygen, are transported.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. It's been quite interesting.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it.